The Great Depression of the late 1920s and early 1930s greatly affected Canada. Historians have this habit of giving major events specific reasons for starting, and the Great Depression has not escaped the fate of being labeled with specific causes. This video will cover 4 of the major reasons of the Great Depression in Canada. October 29, 1929 became known as Black Tuesday as it was the day of the stock market crash of 1929. It signaled the recession that led to the Great Depression. During the Roaring Twenties, people had been able to easily take loans and shares in companies quickly increased in value. Once shares had reached a certain point, people stopped buying them because they were too expensive, but started selling them to get their money out. As the share values decreased, people suddenly rushed to withdraw their shares so that they would not lose their money and savings. Afterwards, they were reluctant to spend their money and tried to save it. This worsened the state of the economy. Many American banks were hit hard by the recession and following depression. In Canada, it was not quite as bad, but the United States, Canada, and the rest of the world had created an interwoven network of trade. While this was good for getting and selling a variety of products, it meant that what happened to one country would affect all that country's trading partners. The stock market crash of 1929 was a huge event that led to the Great Depression. After World War I, the world grew industrially, and many new inventions popped out on the market. Items such as cars and radios were new and popular. Almost everyone wanted to own one. People now also began having extra money to spend on these luxuries, and they took loans to help cover the costs. The banks granted these loans with ease, not really checking whether people would be able to pay them back on time or not. Investors even took loans to buy more shares. This system worked as long as share prices increased and the economy was going well. But as soon as Black Tuesday hit, banks began demanding their money back, only to find that people who owed them money were unable to pay. Those who held shares in the bank withdrew them to protect their savings, leaving the banks broke. If credit had not been so readily available, the value of the shares would likely not have increased so dramatically, and the banks would have had more reliable investors. The availability of easy credit turned out to be detrimental to the world economy. The economies in countries around the world became very intertwined after World War I. Shipping was faster than ever before, and countries relied on each other for imports and exports. The USA had grown to become a powerful nation with a booming economy, and Canada relied heavily on this country as an export market as well as for imports. For example, Canada produced a lot of wheat in the prairies. When the Depression hit the USA, the world's demand for grain decreased, and Canada lost a lot of export markets. Additionally, other countries increased their tariffs so that citizens would prefer to buy products produced in their own country as it was cheaper. Canadian farmers continued to grow wheat, which led to an oversupply of grain that no one wanted. Furthermore, because countries depended on each other so much, this meant that what happened to one country would affect many other countries as well. If, during the 1920s, Canada had exported and imported few products, they would have been quite independent on the economic scale, and the Depression in the USA would not have hit Canada as hard as it did. Overdependence on exports to the USA and other countries turned out to be a calamitous mistake, and was one of the reasons why Canadians suffered during the Great Depression. During the 1920s, the prairies had the perfect conditions for growing wheat and other grains. They were able to export lots of wheat, and the prairie provinces, particularly Saskatchewan, became rich. The first stages of the drought began in 1928 when there was much less rainfall than in previous years. With every ensuing year, the drought worsened. Strong winds whisked away topsoil, and the lack of water made it difficult to grow anything. Soon, plagues of grasshoppers swarmed the land and ate those plants that managed to survive the drought conditions. Not only were the grasshoppers in drought a problem, a disease called rust became prevalent. It weakened mature crops and caused them to die. What wheat and other grains could be harvested by farmers sold for much less than before due to the Depression. This left farmers with very little money, and many tried to find work in cities. The jobless farmers increased the unemployment rate, making it even harder for people to find work. The correlation of the drought and the Depression left hundreds of farmers destitute and made the Great Depression in Canada worse. So there you have it, 4 major reasons of the Great Depression in Canada.